Greetings and welcome to the second mini lecture on elections and parties and a little bit on interest groups. In the first mini lecture, I gave you some overviews and I really emphasized the difference between American and British campaigns and elections in terms of money. I made the observation that I believe too much money is involved in American elections, that essentially candidates and parties often try to buy elections, that usually the candidate that spends the most money wins. Usually that's the incumbent, the person that's in office. In Britain, there's a lot more turnover in terms of seats going from one party to the other. About a third of the seats are competitive in British elections, and I think one of the reasons is because money is not a significant factor in British elections. There's only some $15,000 or so, $18,000, whatever the average is. It varies a little bit. I know many years ago I thought at one time possibly running for Congress. I know it was uh, a fantasy of mine. It wasn't going to really happen. But I had a discussion with a former student of mine who was very highly placed in the Clinton reelection effort. In fact, she coordinated the Northern California part of the campaign. She flattered me. She said, Rich, if you ever decide to run for political office, I'll do it for free. It would be an honor. I was going to be a fashion designer until you entered my life, and politics became my life after that, which was kind of interesting. I'm not sure whether I'm thrilled by that or sad that I took a potential genius out of the fashion world. Maybe clothing would look a little different if I hadn't tempted Kim into the political world. But what was interesting about it was she said, "I'll run your campaign for free, and but you got to show me you're a serious candidate, and so you're going to need to raise around $2 million. And if you can raise $2 million, then we can talk about a potential house run." And that just staggered me to think that I wouldn't even be a serious candidate. This was up in the Sacramento area some time ago, and I just was flabbergasted at that. And obviously, instead of running for Congress, I ran down to Merced and Turlock and continued my teaching career. So I think that really illustrates the money thing that I was talking about. Second's media. In Britain, there's a ban on political advertising on the television and radio. In the United States, elections are seemingly 30 and 60-second spots that market political candidates like underarm deodorant or toothpaste. In Britain, and I think that this is really a good idea, the parties are given limited free airtime to advertise their party agendas in meaningful blocks of time. And these are usually 10-minute blocks of time. So you get 10 minutes, you can actually give a coherent message. It's very, very different than running a campaign ad that's 30 or 60 seconds. And even if you go on to a local radio or TV station, you may get a meaningful block of time. On national TV. You simply are not. One of the things also that I like about the British media is that they insist on an equal time provision for major political parties. So all the parties have an opportunity to express their platforms. And of course, that's not true in the United States. Certain people tend to get covered more than others, and usually because they provide a certain entertainment factor. Third, the length of the campaign. I mentioned this one earlier. British elections range from 3 weeks. In fact, I've seen British elections as short as 18 days to a month, and usually kind of a rule of thumb is 3 to 4 weeks. I mentioned earlier that the last British election in 2019 lasted 25 days, and the last American presidential election was some 650 days. And the fact that there's already talk about the Republican challengers for 2024, as I mentioned in the first mini lecture, is astounding to me, particularly since President Biden has only been in office a little over a month, about 6 weeks or so. Fourth, the bargaining relationship. This one's mentioned in Roskin, and this is very different than in the United States. In the United States, if a candidate wants to run for political office, they usually live in a town or a community and they want to represent their community. So, if I wanted to run for Congress, my district would represent part of Fresno down to Merced. But in Britain, this isn't true. In Britain, there are a lot of people who represent districts that they don't live in. And it's not the candidate that gets to decide where they run for political office. It is the party that decides where they run. And your book points out, I think effectively, although I don't think it's explained real well, that there's a bargaining relationship between the parties. So the central party may recommend a candidate to run in a constituency, and the local party may say no, they have a veto. The local party may say, hey, we've got a bright person that lives here that wants to represent this district, and the national party may say no. So both the national party and the local party have to agree. They both have a veto over the other. So the fact that local and national party leaders decide where candidates run is very, very different than in the United States, where the candidates themselves decide where they run for office. Fifth, in Great Britain, there is the primacy of party. Political party is most important. And in the United States, frankly, personality is more important than party, although I do believe that recently, at the local level, that may have changed. Certainly, at the presidential level, I think personality dwarfs party. In fact, Donald Trump ran as a Republican, and yet did not really stand for anything that the Republican Party had traditionally stood for decades, and in fact, kind of took over the party. And in fact, something happened in 2020 that had never happened before. The Republicans did not run on a party platform. They just said that we just agree with Donald Trump. So certainly you can see personality being all encompassing, at least in that example. So I pointed out in the notes, in Britain, party is more important than personality. Clearly true. In the United States, I believe the opposite is true. In the United States, candidates live in the constituency they represent, with rare exception. In Britain, usually only a minority of MPs. An MP is a member of Parliament or a member of the House of Commons. In Britain, the party reserves safe seats for party leaders, and safe seats are seats that a political party has held for decades. So, for example, if we're talking about safe seats in the United States, representing San Francisco would be a safe seat for a Democrat, or representing rural Mississippi might be a safe seat for Republicans, for example. So there are safe seats in both countries. There are unsafe seats in both countries. There are far more safe seats in the United States than in Britain. And in Britain, unsafe seats, seats that you're going to lose. They're testing grounds for newcomers to politics. So, you send a newcomer in to see can they do better than expected? Are they a good party activist? Are they going to continue to work hard for the party? And it's expected that newcomers are going to lose. And even Britain's superstars, even their most successful prime ministers, and I just listed four of them, there's a lot of them. But even if you take a look at Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, the only two British prime ministers in the post World War II era to win three consecutive elections, both of them lost their first bid for political office. They both were sent into a seat that the other party was going to win, and they lost. In fact, that happened to Margaret Thatcher twice. She didn't win until her third bid for political office. Happened to Gordon Brown. It happened to David Cameron. It's part of the apprenticeship process. It's part of the growth process in Britain. Um, in the United States, obviously, there is not an apprenticeship process. These people all run as individual candidates. Certainly, party leaders have a lot of power in the United States, but the party doesn't decide where you run. The party doesn't decide whether you're running in a safe or an unsafe seat. You decide that yourself. Sixth, in terms of interest groups, labor plays a far more significant role in Britain than in the United States. Put some stars next to it. It's an exam question. About 25% of the British labor force is unionized. I think the last time I looked at the United States is about 11%. It was 50% in Britain until Margaret Thatcher came along. So labor unions are more powerful in terms of numbers in Britain than the United States, but because union membership has been halved, the unions by themselves cannot win elections. And what we have seen recently, and when I say recently, I mean since 1979, since Margaret Thatcher was prime minister, is that labor has been most successful when they've embraced candidates of the right, when the more moderate candidates of the Labor Party have won, and certainly the best example of that would be Tony Blair. He was able to win three consecutive elections by making an election appeal more in the center instead of on the far left. In fact, Tony Blair was a huge Bill Clinton fan. He sent his campaign aides to go shadow the Clinton people and learn things from them, and then modeled his own campaign largely after Bill Clinton. Now, there is something in Roskin that I don't think he explains very well. In fact, I would claim that he doesn't even make that link clear. And that is the biggest difference between American and British interest groups is in the United States, especially business interest groups. They outspend labor in the United States more than 11 to 1. So for every dollar spent by a labor union in the United States, more than 11 is spent by corporate America. Because money is so crucial in American elections, interest groups flood candidates with money and they expect access. In some cases, they expect more than access in return. Interest groups don't have this effect in Britain. Money is not crucial in British elections. However, I would point you might see one question or the other. You could see both. You should know the only interest group that both that were mentioned by Roskin in the chapter. The Trade Union Congress is allied with labor and pretty formally. The Confederation of British Industry has a much looser relationship with the Conservative Party. They are not as tightly bound to them. It's more of an umbrella organization. And both of these are more advocates of policy instead of actually engaging in electioneering. So interest groups tend to do two things. They tend to engage in electioneering, and they tend to engage in lobbying. In the United States, it's both, but I think electioneering is more important. In Britain, I think lobbying is more important. In the next mini lecture, I will finish up differences in parties, but I will focus on common features in elections between Britain and the United States.